Well, good morning again. Happy Sabbath. The title is I Can't, but He Can. But on the title on the slide before it says, when I can't, that's when I have to. And it's also subtitled, when the going gets tough. There's just a lot of ways to put this as to what the message is that I wanted to talk about. But where I thought about this was the other day. I was out walking Grace, and I got a late start. Usually I try to get out about 6:30 because of the heat. I got a late start, and it was hot, and my back was killing me, and I was tired, and we were dragging. And I called Susan. I said, I don't know if we're going to make it back from this walk. We were already a mile out. And she said, well, you want me to come get you? Which kind of was what I was hinting at, I think. And I said, you know what? No, you can't. Because it's when I can't do something that I have to do it. It's when it's so difficult. I'm not talking about where it's life-threatening or limb-threatening, but when it's something that's so hard for me, mentally in particular, to get through. Because most of my challenges, even though physically I may be in pain, most of my challenges are not restricted by physical limitations. They're limited by my mental limitations. And I said, no. We were still over a mile out. We got to make it back. And we dragged ourselves back. It was hot. We were tired. And we got back to the house. And this happens to me a bit when I'm working on a project and I can't do it anymore. That's when I get motivated to do it, because I know that I can't stop just because I don't want to do something anymore. I have to complete the job and the mission. I'm mission-oriented, and I have to complete the mission that I started. There's a saying, and it says, the more we sweat in practice, if you will, the less we bleed in war. And that has been accredited. Norman Schwarzkopf said that when he was doing one of the graduation speeches at the Naval Academy. Richard Marchenko, Lieutenant Commander Richard Marchenko, who is the founder and commanding officer for SEAL Team 6, said that, and it was published in his book when he said that. George S. Patton was credited for saying that. Heck, even Michael Jordan was credited for saying that at one time. The actual person who started that, and I just forgot her name, was a prime minister in India, a woman who originally had made that statement. But it's true. The more we practice, or the more we sweat in practice, the harder we work when it's not a crisis, the less we bleed when it is a crisis. The better we are able to manage those situations. And that's what I wanted to talk about today, because if not in your life, I can tell you in mine that the going has gotten tough. Physically, emotionally, spiritually, sometimes it's difficult to make it through a day sometimes. Sometimes we have to live hour to hour because of the difficulties that we face in our lives. Isaiah 41:10 says, don't be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be discouraged, for I am your God. And then he goes on to say why we shouldn't be afraid and why we shouldn't be discouraged, because he says, I will strengthen you and help you. The message is, I'm not doing this by myself. Even though I may feel alone at times, I'm not. I will hold you up with my victorious right hand. So when the going gets tough, what do? We got to get going. During hard times, I guess during all times, we will face trials, temptations, tribulations. I call them perturbations sometimes. But the Lord never leaves us. If you look at James 1:12. See, Tim's not here to correct me on my verses today. It says, blessed is the one who what? You know what the word is it says in there? Who perseveres when they're under trial. Because having survived or stood the test we get that crown of life that God has promised to us. That's what happens to us when we persevere through those trials and those tribulations. Not that we do it on our own strength, but that we call on the Lord to guide and direct us through those hard times. When the going gets tough, Christians can lean on God. I don't know what non-Christians do. I don't know what unbelievers do, because I try to think back to before I had accepted Jesus. And when times got tough, I guess what I did was I fought back. That's what I did. I kicked against the goads. I would scream and yell and punch and kick and exhaust myself and end up not really ever getting anywhere. Psalm 18:2 says, "The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my Savior. My God is my rock in whom I find protection. He is my shield, the power that saves me, and my place of safety." You know, everybody's got to have a safe space now. That's my safe space, is when I'm in my prayer closet with God. Psalm 55:22 says that I should cast my burdens on the Lord, and he will sustain me. 2 Corinthians 1:9, actually 8-9 says, "We think you ought to know, dear brothers and sisters, about the trouble we went through in the province of Asia." This is Paul talking about the things that they experienced. "We were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure, and we thought we would never live through it." You know how that verse goes, that we are crushed on all sides, but we're not defeated. We're knocked down, but we don't stay down, right? We are what? We are weebles. Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. We were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure, and we thought we would never live through it. In fact, we expected to die. Anybody here in that position lately, where you feel overwhelmed to the point where you just can't endure another moment of it? I had a friend of mine who would say, don't give up 5 minutes before the miracle. And if it doesn't come in 5 minutes, just wait 5 minutes more. And don't ever give up before it happens. In fact, it says we expected to die. But as a result, we stopped relying on ourselves. So you see the process here. I know I've told you this before, but it was a church in one of my travels one day, out on the kiosks. You know, churches have those cute little sayings. And this one has always stuck with me. And it says, "Let God be our first resource, not our last recourse." So after I have tried everything else to get myself out of a jam, and I've exhausted myself and all of my options, when I expect to die, that's when I start to realize that maybe I can't, but he can. And I begin to turn my focus to relying on God, because he has raised the dead. He has turned back time. He has made axe heads float. He has given blind people their vision and crippled people the ability to walk. He has taken people with leprosy and made them clean, with cancer and made them whole again. So what is it that I think that God can handle? Just think about this. What problem do you have in your life right now that is so big that God can't handle it? Anybody? Because I can think of that when I'm in the midst of it. I think like maybe God can't handle this. But when I bring myself back to a sense of reality, or I have someone who helps me come back to this point of sanity, I realize that there's not a single problem that I could have, not an injury, an illness, a disease, a social, a mental, spiritual problem, a temptation that God is not capable of dealing with.
Unless we don't ask.
What's that?
Unless we don't ask.
Unless we don't ask. But you know, sometimes he even knows.
I know.
And he works and moves and works miracles on us. Faith will move mountains, but what is it that I've said before? You better bring a shovel. Because we have a part to play in this as well. It's when I call Susan and say, I can't make it home. And, I'll tell you a quick story. I know she'll remember this. When we were up when I had all my own body parts and I was a little more physically capable, I hiked all the peaks in the Catskill Mountains and many in the Adirondacks. And I would go out for a week or two at a time with no food, just my Bible, and I would live off of what I could find up there. And I went out this one time, and they had projected that the lows were going to be around the mid-40s. So I packed for mid-40s. And when I got out there that night, a cold front had come through. It went down to 17 degrees. I was in my tent, and I was shivering so bad, I didn't think I was going to survive. And I called Susan to say goodbye. I had a signal up there in the mountains, and I called her and told her that I didn't think I would make it through the night. It was terrible. It was so bad. And all I had with me was, my Bible, and that's what I did. I started reading, and I also lit my stove inside the tent, and I figured either I'll freeze to death or I'll die of carbon monoxide poisoning. But at least I got a shot at this, and lo and behold, I survived it through the night. But I had to do my own part. There are things that I had to do in order to do my very best, at least at what I could do. So I could call on God for help, but I can't ignore things. I can ask God to help me with my health, but I can't go out and eat poorly and not exercise and not observe the health laws that he's given us and expect that he's just going to fix things if I'm being neglectful or careless. James 2:14 says, what good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith, but you don't show it by your actions? Can that kind of faith save anyone? James 2:17 goes on to say, so you see, by the way, he asked that question, can that kind of faith save anyone? That's not a rhetorical question, by the way. And he goes on 3 verses later, and he answers his own question. He said, so you see, faith by itself is what? It isn't enough. Unless it produces good deeds, it is dead and useless. Sometimes you just need a couple friends to help you out. This is one of my favorite stories in Exodus. It says, while the people of Israel were still at Rephidim, the warriors of Amalek attacked them. Moses commanded Joshua, choose some men to go out and fight the army of Amalek for us. Tomorrow I will stand at the top of the hill, holding my staff of God in my hand. So Joshua did what Moses had commanded and fought the army of Amalek. Matter of fact, right now, everybody, take your arms and just put them out. Hold them out. Hold them out. And do not put them down until I finish reading this. As long as Moses held up the staff in his hands, the Israelites had the advantage. But whenever he dropped his hand, the Amalekites gained the advantage. Moses' arms soon became so tired he could no longer hold them. So Aaron and Hur found a stone for him to sit on. Then they stood on each side of Moses, holding up his hands. So his hands held steady until sunset. As a result, Joshua overwhelmed the army of Amalek in battle. Anybody's arms getting tired yet?
Yes.
Yeah, right? And now imagine you got the staff in your hands. Those weren't balsa wood or made of titanium or some lightweight aircraft aluminum or a carbon composite, right? They were heavy-duty wood, worm, or whatever they called that wood that they had then. Heavy-duty stuff. And imagine this. When I used to work out, I would take 2-gallon jugs and I would hold them out like this as long as I possibly could. And 3 or 4 seconds later, that was the end of it.
3 or 4 seconds.
Yeah. It didn't do quite as well as I had wanted to. Sometimes we just need some people we can rely on. When the going gets tough, sometimes I can't just do it on my own, and I can pray and ask God to help, but sometimes I need something with flesh on it to be there to help me out as well. What do we learn from this? Number one is we can't be afraid to ask people for help. I'll tell you how this goes. Have you ever had someone ask you for help with something? Anybody raise your hands?
Of course.
Okay. And did you help them?
Of course.
How did you feel?
Great.
It's a blessing, isn't it? Now, if you don't ask someone for help, You know what you've done? You've robbed their blessing. Someone asks you for help and you help them and you're grateful they asked you and you feel good about it. You've been blessed for that. What if they wouldn't ask you for help? You would have missed that blessing. So when we don't ask somebody else for help when we need it, we are robbing that person of a blessing that they could be getting. We can't be shy about asking for help. Number two, if we obey the Lord's voice when he speaks to us, and we keep our promises, our covenant with him, then we will be his treasured possession and his holy people. It also tells us we need strong leaders in the church. That's what Moses was. He wasn't afraid to let go, even though it got tough. When we're saved and baptized, we understand that we are in spiritual warfare. We are at war right now, whether we realize it or not. And when there's no way, God can make a way. We should never give up hope. Never give up 5 minutes before the miracle. Because, people without God, without hope, who don't believe that, sometimes they give up. We see the rate of suicide increasing exponentially. It's sad. And not just when people are really sick or in pain, they do it because they feel hopeless, like there's nothing left for them and there's no way out of the hole that they dug themselves in. Courage is not getting rid of fear. Courage is pushing through fear. I know that's something for sure that they're teaching justice in Marine Corps boot camp. It's what they taught us. It's what the guys that I was stationed with, that's what we learned. We did things where, I can tell you, I did things where I was so afraid that I soiled myself. So afraid. But we still did what we had to do because it was the mission that we were given. Now, my mission's a little different, and my commanding officer is God. So it comes from a different authority. But we just because we're afraid doesn't mean that we stop doing what we're supposed to do. We have to push through the fear. Isaiah 41:13 says, "For I hold you by your right hand, I, the Lord your God, and I say to you, don't be afraid. I am here to help you." I took Grace to the vet yesterday. She had to get her rabies vaccination. And something happened between the first time when I took her and she was fine, and a couple times later when she just scared to death to be there. And Grace is a fairly aloof dog. She's not very affectionate, kind of like that. She just stays away when I don't want her bothering me. And we went in there, and she jumped up on that couch, and she shoved her head right behind me. And she hid behind me because she was afraid. And she exhibited that fear. But when push came to shove, we got done what we had to get done, and we moved on. But I was responsible to help manage that process for her. And that's what God does for us, is that even though we can be afraid, he's there to hold our hand and to comfort us. And we have to push through the pain as well. And as our church ages a bit, many of us have physical pain. I've had 2 pain-free days since I was 26 years old. And I can tell you the dates that those days happened. But it can't stop me from doing the things I got to do, And we in biblical times, they endured things that we can't even imagine. And yet they still completed their mission because that's what it was. Romans 5:3-5 says, "We glory in our suffering, in our pain, because we know that suffering produces what? Perseverance, which produces character, which produces hope." And it's not just in us, it's in other people. I can't emphasize this enough. When other people watch us complete our missions in the face of fear and pain, they are impressed. And if we let them know that we did that not under our own power, but because of the power of God, then we become a strong and powerful witness to them. 1 Peter 5:10 says, "After suffering, God will restore you and make you strong." Psalm 68:19 says that God will deliver you from pain and heal you from brokenness. So the pain that we experience isn't just physical pain, it's emotional pain that we have to deal with as well. Psalm 34:18 says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He rescues those whose spirits are crushed." Psalm 147:3 says, "God heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds." Matthew 11:28 says, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden." Is he talking about physical pain here? No, we're talking about emotional pain here. "And I will give you rest." And Psalm 119:143 says, "Trouble and distress have come upon me, but your commands give me delight." So it's when I can't do something that I need to be motivated, and I need to recognize, I need to understand why I can't do something. Is it because of a physical limitation? I can't hold those jugs up more than I can hold those jugs up. But is it because I don't want to experience the pain, or I don't want to experience the fear? Do I not go out and do something around the house when it's hot because I'm tired of taking 3 and 4 showers a day? Is it too hot for me to do something? Do I not want to make it through? Or is there a limitation? Because if that can't is really a can, but I just don't want to, then I need to really examine my motive. 2 Corinthians 11:24-29 says 5 different times, this is Paul speaking again, "The Jewish leaders gave me 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. Once I spent a whole night and a day adrift at sea. I have traveled on many long journeys. I have faced danger from rivers and from robbers. I have faced danger from my own people, the Jews, as well as from the Gentiles. I have faced danger in the cities, in the deserts, and on the seas, and I have faced danger from men who claim to be believers, but are not. I have worked hard and long, enduring many sleepless nights. I have been hungry and thirsty and often gone without food. I have shivered in the cold without enough clothing to keep me warm." I think I might have given up right about now. When it was time to go to the next town, I may have said, "No, I can't." He goes on to say, then besides all this, like that's not enough, I still got to worry about you guys, right? In the midst of all my own problems that are going on, you guys are giving me headaches as well. He said, "Who is weak without my feeling that weakness, and who is led astray, and I do not burn with anger, and it's when I can't that I just have to." I can't tell you how it builds character to push through those things that are so difficult that I say to myself, I can't do it. You know, when I was helping our friend Hillary to train for her first triathlon, and she was coming from a point where she wasn't in, first marathon, where she wasn't in very good physical condition. And I had done some marathons and done some training, and she asked if I'd help her, and I said, "You won't like it, but I'll help you, and this is what I need you to do." And on the hottest possible days, I had her running bridges, up and down, dying out there on the bridges. And when the big tropical storm came in, I called her and I said, "I need you out running." She said, "But it's lightning and thunder and it's pouring out." I don't care. You got to go out now and do it. Because the more we sweat in practice, the less we bleed in war. And it paid off for her, because in one of those marathons that she ran in upstate New York, in the cold rain and the mountains, when everybody else was dropping out, mostly mentally, because they weren't accustomed to running in other than perfect weather, because that's when people train. You train when it's the hardest. And then when the challenge comes, you're ready for it. She came over to visit one day, to visit Susan and I, and it was a horribly hot day. It was miserable. I said, "You bring your running shoes?" And she said, "Yep." And we ran together all the way to Honeymoon Island and back 17 miles. Without water, probably not the smartest thing. But it builds your confidence. When I can't and I push through it, and God is there to help me, and my faith increases, my confidence increases in my ability to do things when I rely on God. And then I get to a point where there's nothing that I can't do when I rely fully on God for that. 2 Timothy 4:6-8 says, as for me, my life has already been poured out as an offering to God. So I have to stop for a minute. And when I can't do it, I have to remember that Jesus already died on the cross for me. I'm not making this happen. I'm not pushing the boundaries. His life has already been poured out as an offering for me as well. The time of my death is near. In fact, every day, the time of my death is even more near. And I have fought the good fight, and I have finished the race, and I've remained faithful. And now the prize awaits me, the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on the day of his return. And the prize is not just for me, but for all who eagerly look forward to his appearing. So in closing, it's a lot to read here. This is a full page. But when I read this, it was the most powerful thing that I have read in a long time. So listen closely to what this says. Life is not all made up of pleasant pastures and cooling streams. Can we get an agreement on that? Trial and disappointment overtake us. Are we still on track here? Privation comes. We are brought into trying places. Conscience stricken, we reason that we must have walked far away from God, that if we had walked with him, we should not have suffered so. Doubt and despondency crowd into our hearts, and we say, the Lord has failed us, and we are ill-used. Sounds like Job, right? Why does he permit us to suffer thus? He cannot love us. If he did, he would remove the difficulties from our path. Are we close here so far? He does not always bring us to pleasant places. If he did, in our self-sufficiency, we should forget that he is our helper. Guys, if it was easy, we would take the credit for it all. We would forget there's a God if we didn't need him once in a while. He longs to manifest himself to us and to reveal the abundant supplies at our disposal, and he permits trial and disappointment to come to us that we may realize our helplessness and learn to call upon him for aid. He can cause cooling streams to flow from the flinty rock. We shall never know until we are face to face with God, when we shall see as we are seen and know as we are known, how many burdens he has borne for us, and how many burdens he would have been glad to bear if with childlike faith we had just brought them to him. I think we're going to be amazed when we get to heaven and we get face to face with God to find out that as tough as we thought things were, they weren't any tougher because he had taken those burdens from us. You think it's hard now? Imagine how hard it would be if we didn't have a God who was there taking those burdens upon himself. You know, have you ever heard of a God box? Here's how a God box works. Actually, my friend Paul introduced me to it. I have a box. It's got a little slot in it. You might think it's a prayer box, but it's not. Every time I got a problem, I take and I write that problem down and I put it in the prayer box or in the God box. And what I'm doing is I'm taking that problem and I'm turning it over to God. And I have another problem and I write that problem down and I fold that paper up and I put it in my God box. And Paul said to me, he said, here's the only rule. If you want to take one of those problems back, you got to take them all back. So if I go back in that box to pull one, I got to pull them all back out. And that's not something that I'm capable of doing. God's love is revealed in all his dealings with his people and with clear, unclouded eyes, in adversity, in sickness, in disappointment, and in trial. We are to behold the light of his glory in the face of Christ and trust to his guiding hand. But too often, we grieve his heart by our own unbelief. God loves his children, and he longs to see them overcoming the discouragement with which Satan would overpower them. Do not give way to unbelief. Do not magnify your difficulties. Remember the love and power that God has shown in times past. So when it gets really bad and you don't think you're going to make it, look back and remember that you already have made it this far. And what was it last time that got you through it? Remember back in the past how God has brought you through your trials and your tribulations and your adversities and your temptations. And then you should be able to believe that if he did it once, he can do it twice. And if he's done it twice, he can do it 3 times. And eventually, my prayer is that we get to a point where we no longer have unbelief. And we no longer doubt that no matter what happens in our lives, that God is not only capable to bring us through it, but if we simply bring it to him, that he will bring us through it as well. Amen?